Welcome to Live Love Today. I'm Pastor Van Bradeen. Today we have a very special episode for you. Our topic is, so you're a faith-based organization. Do you act like it? Joining Vince and myself as a special guest and a good friend of mine is Keith Lambert. Keith is a professor of education at Whitworth University here in Spokane, Washington. Keith brings a wealth of experience and knowledge and a unique perspective on how faith-based organizations are not always so faith-based. So whether you're a part of a faith-based nonprofit, educational institution, or any organization that identifies with faith-based values, today's discussion will offer valuable insights on aligning your actions with your mission. We'll explore and share real-world examples and maybe even challenge some common assumptions along the way. This is Live Love Today.
All right, sorry. All right, welcome back. We are here with Live Love Today. We got a great podcast for us. We have our first ever guest, Keith Lambert, who is actually a professor here at the Whitworth University here in Spokane, Washington. And always, I'm sitting with the mighty Pastor Van Bradeen. Say hello, guys. Yeah, we're excited for this one. We got a good one coming to you guys today. We're going to be talking about this concept of religion versus relationships. And Van and I have been talking about this, and we're excited to have Keith throw in his view of it. I think he's going to have some great stories about what we're talking about versus what is religion, what is a relationship, which is more important. So with that being said, Van, you and I have talked about this quite some time. We've been excited for this podcast. So thank you, Keith, for coming along. But to get everybody started, what are we talking about? Religion and relationships? What are we talking about here?
Well, great topic, great question. And thanks, Keith. Keith's a good friend of mine. Him and his wife are good friends with my wife and I. And so thank you so much. But when I look at society today, our culture, our society, Keith we're in our mid-50s, and
wow. Always got
I'm not going to say the other word, but when I look at our culture, I think the people that are Christians that are not in churches today are not there because churches have become religious. Now, we're going to talk about that, what that means. We have some different opinions on that. We're going to share that. But I think people hate religion because religion, to me, kills. So I'm just going to use really quick, the overall arching in the Bible is this. God created the old covenant with Moses, with the nation of Israel. And the Bible says it was perfect. Because God created it. It was a law that he created and all the things that went with that. But over the centuries, and we had talked about this earlier, when Jesus came on the scene, who did he rebuke the most? He rebuked the same people under the law that brought the law. But what they did, how they I'm going to say bastardized it, the law, is that they took the law of God that was perfect and they added a whole bunch of rules to it. So when it got to Jesus centuries later, there was a whole bunch of other stuff added to God's law, and that's why Jesus rebuked all the Pharisees and the Sadducees at many times, because they were living under God's law, but a bunch of additions. So when I look at modern day, I look at churches and in legalism versus grace and all the different things, control versus freedom, and those things we'll talk about. But how do we help people, walk with people in a Christian community and not get religious? Everybody's going to have different opinions on that, but that's kind of the heart of where I want to go. Now, my good friend Keith here has worked in institutions, Christian institutions, whatever you want to call that, whether they're colleges or high schools and so forth. So we're going to have some great examples of that in institutions as well. But when you look at even some of the institutions in our own country that have been here for decades and over hundreds of years, you look at a Salvation Army. I mean, when the Salvation Army started, it was about getting people saved, relationship with Jesus. In the 1800s, it was a radical situation. It's nothing like that anymore. It doesn't resemble anything that it started out with.
Well, Keith, I think you should jump right in here. And I guess the first thing we have for you, working in, kind of Christian organizations for the majority of career, and especially Whitworth, which I've known for a while. I'm growing up in Spokane on the north side. I know this university very well. This religious principle of rules and regulations, it's something that you've had to deal with probably the majority of your professional career. What are your takes on religion versus relationships and maybe some of the negative sides of religions that you've seen?
Yeah, no, I've spent the majority of my career in Christian education. Yeah. Did not expect that. Did not expect that at all, let me tell you. I was going to be a public school teacher. I was going to be a light in the public school. Didn't do it. God has a sense of humor. You realize that, right?
Well, offline, maybe you want to tell the story off the cuff, and we do that here. That's what we like. But maybe you tell the story because you mentioned it briefly that you were like, I'm not gonna be working in Christian institutions, and God said, yeah, you are, and you're like, no. And then here you are. You spent most of your career doing exactly that. How did that all go down?
Well, let me tell you, it started in kindergarten. I was in a Christian school in Salem, Oregon, and my only memory from Christian school was getting my hand slapped with a 5-year-old. That was my reason for not going into Christian education.
Time to do it.
And I think, hindsight, you look back at that, I wonder if there was some legalism that tied to that. Like, you can't hit kids now.
Yeah, oh no.
I mean, that would remove you from any school. Yeah. But back then, you could slap a kid's hand, and that hurt.
But when I was in kindergarten, I needed.
Well, my mom will probably tell you I needed it too.
Yeah.
No, I had no intention, and my first job was here at Northwest Christian, actually, right out of graduation. Had no intention of doing that. Started out as a public school substitute, and they called me up 3 weeks in the year and said, hey, you interested in a PE job? I'm a history teacher, but sure, I could do that. Yeah. I actually had a really good time at Northwest Christian. I'm not going to lie. That was a fun year. I got a lot of freedom to do some things. I started a ski club. It was all about relationships, all about getting to know students. And my claim to fame was actually Jeremy Afeld was a second grader, I think. So,
there you go.
I'll take a little credit for getting him out on the field. No credit. My experience at the next school, though, completely different. Legalism versus relationship. I went into a school, I had to sign a contract that said I would not smoke, I would not drink, I would not go with girls that do, I would not go to movie theaters, I would not. You had to initial all that. Yeah. And I almost didn't sign it.
Yeah.
And my dad said, so when you're standing before God and he says, you didn't go to that school because...
Yeah.
I'm like, no, don't throw that one at me. I don't want that one. Yeah. Fine, I will. My second year, I didn't sign as many because I challenged them with the scriptures they were using. And I said, this scripture talks about being drunk. Yeah. It doesn't talk about not drinking. And I challenged that. But everything in my career has been about establishing relationships with kids. That's it. Yeah. That's the most important thing.
Well, I think one of the things, you guys already dated yourself a little bit, so you'll go with that. I am younger than you. I'm one of the older millennials out there. One thing that I have really is very interesting to me is my generation doesn't go to church anymore. I mean, like we've left the church at a massive amounts, even though our parents may be still going and whatnot. And it does kind of come down to this whole, we don't want to fall into all these rules and all of these things that we have seen in place, but have seen broken and many times as well. It wasn't always the rule for the same person. It was like if you knew someone, or this person got away with it, or this person did it and got away with it, never got caught, and no one ever talked about it, but this person got caught, and it was just crucifixion of that person. We've seen all of that. So we've thrown this whole, we don't want to go to that. And if you think of church today, more often than not, people think of it as this place of the do's and don'ts. This is what you have to do. This is how I have to act. And when we talk about now this, like, oh, there's freedom to go live like Jesus. There's freedom in this relationship with God. Yeah. When you go to church or even a religious institution, it doesn't feel like that. Is it? Where do these rules and regulations come from? And where did they want you to sign all of these very detailed contracts? What was the conception of that? Why did they want you to do that?
Well, I think, especially at that one school, I actually asked that question. Why do we meet every morning at 7 a.m.? Yeah. Well, so I know you're there. I'm like, I'm going to come to school and teach. Like, I don't need to meet every morning. And I think that's where those rules came from, right? If I have these rules, then I know they're not doing the things that they're not supposed to do. Yeah. Right. But I think it comes out of a sense of control, right? If we can control the environment, we know that we can have a perfect image, if you will, or an image that really models what we want Christianity to look like. I mean, we wore ties. Students wore ties on Wednesdays for chapel.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing.
Holy day.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Is like, what does Christianity need to look like? I mean, and so that's like they're trying to establish this image, and that's what you've dealt with probably the majority of your career.
Sure. Yeah, but doesn't when we say religion, kind of what you're explaining right there, doesn't that make people want to hide stuff?
No, I guarantee it.
Because you were called up, said, you better be here at 7. I just want to know that you're here. Those kind of rigid things are like, well, I'm not telling no one nothing.
Yep.
But in a relationship environment where you're going to actually help people through stuff, people are all, I could share with Keith, or I could share with Vince, or I could share with a friend. I'm struggling with something, and they're not going to beat the hell out of me.
Yeah.
That's relationship in a church or an institution or wherever it is. It's like I could trust somebody. They have my back. They're going to actually try to help me through something instead of, and if it's legalistic, it's like, I'm not telling you nothing, because all you're going to do is shoot people, and you're going to mow people down with your mouth. It's just like, why talk about anything?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think oftentimes when I look back at my teaching career, right, especially in the Christian schools, what do I remember most? The relationships with the students.
Yeah.
At Linden Christian, where I was the assistant principal and principal, they called me Lambo.
Yeah, very cool.
Except the board hated it. There were some board members who were like, well, they can't call you Lambo. That's not respectful. I said, to hell, it's not.
Yeah,
it's very respectful.
Yeah.
I did not.
They probably respected you more because they let that relationship you had with them than if they had to call you Mr. Lambert.
Students knew that when they came to my office, they were going to get their ass kicked.
Yeah.
And there was a reason for that.
Right.
But they also knew when I walked them out of my office and put my arm around them,
you cared about them.
It's a new day tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
Tomorrow's a new day.
Right.
This happened, but tomorrow's a new day.
Yeah.
That is relationship. That's the right. If we talk about a professional world, that's the difference between a relationship with someone versus the religion of whatever the Christian environment happens to be.
Well, I want to be clear with this, and I think you meant this same thing, but I think what really is even more important is when we put the Christian title on that professional environment. Mm-hmm. You know, when we put if you're claiming to be a Christian, and I think that's where the massacres and the cutting of people down happens more. And you said this offline, and I thought it was super good and very true. But this concept of Christians, and I want to include churches in here because we got a Pastor Van Bradeen, the mighty Pastor Van Bradeen, so he can handle it. I'm bringing it.
Just give him the mighty.
I give it to him all the time because I don't hold back. So this concept of Christian, not only in churches, and you've been an elder and you've held leadership positions in that, but you made this comment, and it's so true that we eat our own. Why is that? Like, why is this concept of we as Christians should be the most loving and kind and gracious and putting our arms around students and saying you have a fresh new time, but what we get is condemnation, judgment, hatred, back talking, backsliding, people judging us, hating us, and really more going back to my generation, we're finding Jesus and a relationship with God outside of a Christian institution, whether it's a church or school. That's just what we're doing. How did we get here, and how do we get back out of here?
Wow.
But I love this concept of eating our own, like we do.
Yeah. We do. And I honestly think it comes from the sense of, look, we are all sinners, right? That's crystal clear in the scriptures.
Amen.
We are all sinners.
Yeah.
It's just that if you're a sinner more than me, then, and I, by golly, I'm not as bad as you. Yeah. And so then, I can justify where I'm at, right? And I think we tend to do that. We do that in the Christian schools. We do that. And again, when I meet with students, I meet them where they're at.
Well, that's good.
And I think that is a model of what Christ does. Christ meets us right where we're at. Right now, how can we model that in the church? And the church, when I say church, I mean big church, right? As believers, how do we model that so that it becomes a place that you as a millennial says, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
I want to be a part of that. We've got to love one another. We got to reach them right where they're at, walk alongside them, put our arms around them and say, yep, you know what? I'm no better. I am no better. I'm no better than
Well, Jesus, we talked about it earlier, the example that in Scripture, the woman that was caught in adultery. Why did everybody instantly pick up a rock to kill her?
Oh,
that's in our flesh,
go, baby.
Right?
Yeah.
We want to feel justified, and Jesus comes along, the only one there that's actually going to grab her hand and try to help her. And then he said, those of you without sin cast the first stone. So they all had sin, but they were willing to kill her. And it's in our flesh.
Well, and I think to that point, right? Legalism is that ability to quantify sin. Well, this sin is more than this sin, and therefore,
there's the reason we brought a professor on. This guy's got it.
Well, I mean it, but I think it's factual. We love.
I like his haircut too.
Yeah, we share the same barber. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, and I want to talk about this, is like the student that was caught pregnant, and then it's like, hey, what about this other person? I think that's a perfect example of what you're talking about, is like we quantify sins, like, we have to have them. Go into that kind of just brief story and prove that point. I think
how you handled it, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I
guess that's what. Thank you, man. I'm sorry. That's why you're amazing, Pastor Van. There you go.
Well, and I don't think I am perfect in handling anything, but
and by no means are we saying that you are. And you've had a very humble and gracious attitude, but I think you have been places and stories where that has helped you to your fold of the humility. So I want to let you know we've never felt like, this guy's a righteous person. Van.
Oh, I know.
Right, very well. You wouldn't be on this podcast if you were, because you wouldn't last. You know what I'm saying? And so you have to be a sinner to be here.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I think it was a very valid, because we do this. What happened, and you've seen this a lot, especially in the Christian environments you've been in, but it was like, man, what should we do to both of this situation?
Yeah. No, we had a young lady in her senior year, basketball player. She got pregnant. Not alone.
For sure. I loved what he said. It was not immaculate conception. Someone else was involved.
Yes, and so
another Christian,
and another athlete. And the first question was to me was, well, she's going to be suspended, right? She can't play basketball,
right?
Why can't she? Is there something medical that prevents her from playing basketball? I mean, she's not going to be showing for a while. I mean, is there a reason we can't have her play basketball? Well, and what about the young man? Well, he's not showing. Somebody actually said that to me. Well, he's not showing, right? This is that whole legalism, right?
No,
see your sin.
The story got better.
I mean, but sure. I was blown away. Well, he's not showing. But that's a good thing he's not showing. That would be illegal. But I met this young lady at her house, and I can remember. I mean, she just was embarrassed. She's, and
well, I think this is. I want you to go to the point. Why did you meet her at her house? I think that's a good example when we were talking about this story. That it stood out to me is like you decided, why do they have to come here? Why don't I go there? Like,
let's go where they are.
But that was kind of your decision to do that, correct? I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah, no. I called her up and said, let me come talk. Let's talk about what your future is going to look like. Right. Do you want to graduate from Linden Christian? Yes. Okay, then let's figure out a way that we're going to make this happen. And the young man, he also wanted to graduate. Great. Right. Then let's figure out how we do this together. Now, there's some consequences for that. You're a parent.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
little do they know that is the consequence. That
I mean, you're going to put it. Yeah, and I know he was not happy with that decision, but it's like, well, no, your priority now is actually your child. That's number one. Yeah. So let's figure out a way that we're going to give this. You walk through that, but there were folks, board members, others. Well, they can't be a student at Linden Christian. Right. Remind me again, why not? Right. I mean, okay, so we're quantifying the sins. The kid that's smoking marijuana, he's perfectly fine, and we can put him on the basketball court. I mean, we don't know because we don't know.
Right.
I'll tell you what, the kids know.
Right.
They used to have an award, the Ideal Linden Christian Graduate Award. I hated that award. Why? They looked the part.
Right.
And there were a couple times where students the faculty voted on this, and students would look and go, that is do you know what he does on the weekends? That's your ideal. But that's what we like to do in Christianity is set people apart, right? They're, look at them.
Which is legalism.
That's the legalism.
That's the legalism part that people hate.
Look at the image. Look at what they look like.
I think if we are truly following Christ, right? I think when we really see who Christ is, and you mentioned the woman at the well, but like Christ throughout the Bible was around pretty terrible people. I mean, he was known to go hanging out with the tax collectors and sinners, even so much his disciples were like, hey, what the heck are you doing, dude? Stay away from these people. And he's like, trust me, I'm doing the right thing. But I think this concept of church people who go to church, that, you know, it's this person, and I might be, this is off the cuff, so hold on to your seats, you two. But it's a person who's like, oh, I've always gone to church. My parents went here. I go here. We go here. I've never done anything wrong type attitude. That legalistic person is doing more damage for the kingdom of God than the sinner who's doing drugs in the corner and not telling anybody. I truly believe that, because we're not meeting people where they are, and we're feeling abandoned in this. And I said this before, and Vin, you can speak to this, and Keith, you too, because of just the positions you've held. When people are coming into your church for the first time, usually something pretty crappy is going on in their life, and they're looking for something. And what they are not looking for is more judgment and consequences and punishment for whatever that is. They're looking for people to meet them where they are and have a genuine relationship. Absolutely. But there's this status, and Van, you can talk into this, and then Keith hop in on this too, but there's this status that comes with who's more holier than the holiest person in the church, you know?
Right. And Keith, you can even comment, because you go to this church, but and it's been a few years since you guys started, but this is one thing, do you know what you just got, Keith? You got righteous points. Yeah. No, you got righteous points. You can go to everybody else in the congregation and says, I was on the amazing Pastor Van Brady's podcast. What do you guys? You get 2 more pews up on Sunday.
I don't want 2 more. I want these seats.
Do you hear that? You need to put reserved for Keith Lambert on the since he's now better.
I just made him permanent MC.
Great.
He has to be up there the whole time. And I could brag on this church in one area, at least one area, and I hear this almost weekly. Man, I came here just, Vince, like you said, we were broken family, and I just got done going through an alcohol program or drug program and tried to get rehab, all this kind of stuff. And no one judged me here. But I want to say this, and it's between me and my wife, Lori, our eldership and leaders here, it's taken years to build a culture like that, because we want to judge. We want to, that person did this sin, this person did this sin, so that person's still all right, but this one's not. Man, we have to kill that culture of legalism and comparing notes, comparing sins, and all those kind of thing. And we got to be like Jesus, who steps in. Okay, you all want to throw stones now, but no, we're not going to do that. If you're without sin, go ahead and throw it. But if you have sin, back up and let's love each other.
Yeah, well, I would echo that. You asked me my opinion on that. My mom raised us to understand that our shit doesn't come wrapped in cellophane. Yeah. And no one in this church is does either. And I think that's what makes it comfortable, right? To come in and realize, okay.
But I think this, and I get you guys, and rightfully so, brag on this church. Right, I get it. And,
that's one area that's been.
I understand, but what I want to be encouraging of people is, it can happen. This can happen in your church too.
It does happen.
And I am a firm believer of, I've gone to a lot of churches, and a lot of big churches, a lot of small churches. That doesn't happen. You can come in and out of a place for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, and never even talk to anybody. Yeah. And you can hide in their back pew. We talked about that a little bit more. But there's a reason why we're going to church. There's a reason why we're searching for something. And so if you're listening to this, I want to encourage you to be like, man, we can change it's happening. And if you want to talk to Keith, if you want to talk to Pastor Van, how they're doing it, how some of those leadership changes made, and you're not feeling that at your church, or you're having that's what I was trying to get at. Sure. Like, hey, let us give you guys, I don't go to your church. So, there is valid proof that I can give the third opinion. I've seen the stories, I've heard them, I've talked to the people. And so it's like, it does work. You guys have done a very good job job loving people and really changing their lives and meeting them where they are, if that's not happening for you at your church, this is your time to be like, okay, it is happening in churches. So it's not like this thing, because that's what this is where I get really frustrated. And maybe this is where you can chime in, again, off the cuff a little bit, but that's what I like about this is, oh, well, we just have to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it. Right. Or we're too big, or we're too this. Linden Christian probably had a lot of we just have always done it this way, so we have to do it this way. And when it's not the right thing to do, it isn't for the better of the relationship of people. Where is that where it's like, hey, we don't need to be stuck in our ways. If you're a church that is not loving people, or you're coming in and out, or if you say, oh, we love people, and you're not seeing transformation in people's lives like you guys are. I mean, that's what's great about your guys' congregation is the stories that do come out a lot. You tune in on your Facebook or your website every Sunday, you'll hear them from the pulpit. I mean, the actual people living out these stories. There's credibility there. But when you think you can't get it done, here's a congregation that is getting it done.
We're working on it. Put it that way.
No, and again, you guys are both very humble, and I understand that.
I want to tell you a story really quick. Okay? This happened about 2 years ago. There was a young couple that came, and I was warned that they're going to come, and I was warned, and not in a bad way, but they were known by another couple of.
Then let's just say that you were let know that they were coming. You used the word warned. Hey, do you know who's going to be at your church this Sunday? Vince McGee is coming this Sunday. Be ready for sure. I just want the reserved seat next to Keith. That's all.
Yes, he can let you sit by him. But anyway, and Keith will laugh at this because I don't think he was a Presbyterian, but he was a staunch Calvinist, and he was a young Bible college student that just had graduated from a Bible college. And I went up to the couple afterwards, and a female who's a great Carrie, she just spoke a message, and it was an amazing message. It was one of her first ones she did. It was amazing. I know. And I went up to this young couple afterwards, and we were talking about it, and he goes, oh, I just got done with Bible college. He named the college. I go, oh, so you're a Calvinist? He goes, yeah. I go, oh, you just didn't like that message, did you? And he goes, I'm struggling with it. I go, well, that's good, because she just preached a great message. Yeah. In other words, I'm not going to allow the BS. A woman can't do this, or a person can't do this, or this can't. This is a church, and we're going to love each other, and we're going to promote each other. We're going to hold hands and follow Jesus together and do those kind of things. And there are screw ups here. I was a Class A screw up for a long time, religious, legalistic, and those kind of things. But you know what? You just got to look at Jesus, and he just destroyed legalism.
Yeah. But I think we got to be careful, because we have to still meet that situation, and I don't know the rest of the story, but we have to meet that situation in love, because the relationship that you and I personally have had too is I came from a Church of Christ, Northside Church of Christ, and very set views and what that is. And there was a lot of love and conversations had, and some of them were contentious. There's been big gaps because you weren't the church for me, but falling on the showing love to those people as well, and I know you did, but I think so many times people come in, and what wins out is the love. I mean, going back to the story that you have of those two kids, I guarantee those two kids still remember the conversations that you had with them going through a really hard time at Linden Christian, being pregnant and having to deal with that. They still remember the grace and love that you showed to them as the leader of that school. And I think that's what we look at as like, hey, I know you had a hard time with this, female pastor. Let's talk. If you ever want to talk about it, if you want, meet these people where they are. And that's what I think the church is really supposed to be about, instead of saying, oh my gosh, a woman preached, because that was hard for me, because we didn't see it coming from the church that I was growing up. Sure. So when you guys had women prophesying or talking or whatever, it was like, dude, this doesn't sit well with me. But Van, we had hard conversations, but they were done out of love, or we wouldn't be sitting here today, So be careful of, I think, in those situations, that meet people where they are, and that's what you guys have done.
Right. Absolutely.
In this discussion, one of the things that's coming through my mind is, how do we get there? How do we get to that point where we have grace to have a relationship? Like I will tell you that relationship with those two kids did not start right away. Let me give you an example. I was a 27-year-old vice principal at Linden Christian. I was all that and a slice of bread.
I mean, Linden Christian's the big dog, baby.
The big dogs. And I, so I'm going to tell you a story about where I did not extend grace.
Yeah.
And how I have since learned and what Tommy taught me in that moment. Right. So, oh boy, put on your seatbelt because there may be an F-bomb drop. So Tommy was a 6'3", probably as tall as you, Van. Tough kid, senior. I was brand new at this school. It was in early October. He was in trouble. I needed to call him out. So, what's the best way to call a student to your office? Why don't you do it during lunchtime from the office while he's sitting across the room? Yeah. Tommy, my office now. Because, the deeper I get the voice and the louder I get, the more he's going to respond in the favor.
Were you buff back then?
Let's just say more buff than I am now. But he says, he looks at me from across the room. You. And now I'm justified. Now I can raise my voice more. Tommy, you get your ass over here right now, because that will work. Like when you yell at somebody and and I have the authority, right? Because let's look at this legalistically. I am the vice principal. You will respond the way I tell you to respond.
My school.
He looks at me one more time. You. Yeah. I'm like, man, now I'm hot. But I'm also thinking this could be where I die. Yeah. Right? Because he's a tall kid, ponytail coming down his back, leather jacket. He's already left a couple marks on the front of the school with his Z, what is Toyota Z? Whatever, Nissan. And I'm like, how is this going to resolve? The superintendent stands behind me and says, Tommy, get in his office. He looks at me and he says, you're new. You need to learn about us. This is my school. And you figure it out. And I was pissed. But I also went home and I went, he's not wrong.
Yeah, I get it.
Right. Here's what I learned about Tommy. Tommy and Keith are actually very similar. Yeah. Tommy's dad was in prison for embezzlement. My dad served time in a federal prison. Actually, right out at Geiger.
Oh, nice. Okay.
When I was a 8th grader, I had to deal with that. Anger, hurt, betrayal, all those things. Tommy and I actually had a lot more in common. And had I taken the time to get to know Tommy,
good stuff,
I would not have had that kind of response to Tommy. Fast forward to the end of the year. Now, I'd love to say that we got along fantastic, but we got to know one another better. End of the year, this tall kid puts his arm around me as we're walking after graduation. Lambo, you're going to be okay. I'm thinking, but those are the moments that we have to be willing to look at, right? And we all struggle with that. That legalism tells us I had the right as an assistant principal.
Boot him out, I
had all the authority. Right. And legalism likes to put these boundaries. And we like to draw lines. And so if you go outside that line, well, then I can really nail you. Relationships take a lot more work.
Well, I think that's a very valid point. What you just said is it's more work. It's not the easy route,
in any way, shape, or form. And you've got to be willing to invest in another human being and invest in a person so that you can get to know them.
That's good.
Right. I go to Seahawks games on Sundays. I have yet to see someone come to their knees with the guy that's holding a repent and turn from Jesus and yelling at them in a mic. I'm like,
Van said this the other day. We were on a podcast and he said, I don't want to go down too big of a rabbit hole, but you said something that was like, all right, those guys shot on the street corner. Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. If it does work, I'm not condemning it. All right, dude. And I thought to myself at the same time, I was like, I've never seen it work. I have never,
it's because it doesn't work.
Right. But when you made that comment, I just want to let you know the thought came through. I was like, all the times I've ever seen someone screaming on the street corner, you're right. I've never seen someone be like, all right, there's me, get me,
Me yelling at Tommy across the school, that across the yard, that was not a relationship. That was a legalistic, you will respond because I tell you to respond. People want to respond because they want to respond. Relationships get to that point. I want to repent of my sin because I have a relationship and you care enough about me to want to be able to do that. Otherwise, legalism, I'm going to hide that. I'm going to hide that stuff.
Well, one thing I want to add here really quick, and I think actually, Vincent, I want to hear from you too, because you have a great past with your environment. You comment earlier, and I want to, and this is for both you guys, coming from, school superintendent or principal, and even maybe where you're at now, and Vincent, your past with the church that you grew up in that you've shared many times. What's the difference between heart transformation and external, and we've already touched on it, but external appearance of like you either look the part or is your heart being transformed?
Well, I think one of the things that comes from, again, Church of Christ background, Northside Church of Christ is where I spent a majority growing up. And as you got older, you saw more and more and more. It was everybody just put on a facade. It was never, what you saw wasn't what it really was. Right. And I think that was because everybody wanted it to look a certain way. Right. I say this all the time, and I think it's funny, but in Church of Christ, the invitation is very important. And that's at the end of the lesson, the pastor says, hey, if anyone needs sin, or if anyone sinned or need in prayers or need help from the congregation, please come forward. And very rarely did anyone ever come forward. And I make this joke all the time. I was like, we should have all probably come forward and sat in the front to your peers,
But doesn't that add to what we said earlier, that if it's legalism, or that's legalistic anyway?
But I think
people don't want to share.
Well, they find a way to hide it, and I think that's what legalism does. And to Keith's point too, as soon as you say, "Hey, this is what we're going to be looking for," the first thing was like, "Well, that's what I'm going to hide from." Thank you for letting me know what the inspection's going to be, so then I can then curtail it. It's like, hey, we're gonna drug test you on next Tuesday. Just be like, all right, I want to make sure I have 3 days before I get the drug test, and thank you for telling me that. So there isn't this willingness of in a relationship. There's something that happens where what I experience now in my faith is it is very relationship, and that when you are walking in a relationship, you want to be your best. You want to put out your best foot, because that's benefiting the other people around you, because they're going to feed off of that. Because if you're putting out your best and maybe someone else needs that little extra boost, that is the heart matter. But going and just looking a certain part, but it's like, the Bible talks about this, the tomb of dead man's bones, they all looked good. They had their prayer tassels and their good clothes and they're very righteous running around, but it was what was inside. That's where I came from. It just looked a certain way. And as you got older, and here's, I think, where relationship comes into real problems, is relationship can't exist with religion. The reason being is once you get to truly know people, they've broken all the laws. They've broken all the rules. And you look at them differently, because it's like, man, I used to see you this way, but now that I know you, which is more authentic, which is what I think Jesus did. He knew people. The woman at the well, he knew her before she even said, well, I'm not even really married. And he says, bingo, answered that one ready. You've actually been married many times to many people, but that's the relationship. And then he still loved her. And what's the most powerful about that is she then went back to the village and told everybody this is the Savior, and thousands came out, or hundreds, don't quote me, and we're billions. For sure. I like it. Billions. Let's go. But came into that. So it's like, when you look at that versus, what it looks like, if you're just worried about what it looks like all the time, it's dead. I mean, dead on arrival, and it won't, but that's why I walked away from church, and I don't go to church. Why would I? And I hear the stories from your guys's, and I'm not disvaluating that. That's why I want to put my stamp of approval. There are churches that are doing a good work, but I've been to hundreds of churches, and it's that same thing. You guys look and just say the right thing, but as soon as I go home, it's like, hey, the people from the church are coming over, hide the whiskey. Hey, put those movies away. You know what? We got church friends coming over, and it's like, why are you different around these people? And it is because of just what the appearance is.
Yeah. No, I mean, that is it. That is it to a T, right? It's that image. How does my front yard look? Right. If my front yard looks good, in Linden, we had a rule: you couldn't mow the lawn on Sundays.
Serious?
Yeah, and there was a law there for a while that your lawn had to be X number of, it couldn't grow above a certain degree.
Dialed in, man, Stepford Wives style.
I mean, it was bizarre. Yeah. It was bizarre. I remember the first time I mowed my lawn on Sunday, and I thought I was going to get struck.
Was there like a drive-by?
I think there were probably calls to every pastor in town. Lambert's mowing his lawn right now.
Heathen. Pitchforks coming, baby.
But I think, you mentioned that idea of hiding, right?
Yeah.
And we hide those things because we're afraid.
Right.
You've got to put your arm around people. And once you do, like I teach my teachers,
Right.
like I prepare educators, right?
Right.
And the one thing I talk about, we talk about classroom management, and there's a whole host of books out
Right.
there. You almost don't even need to read any of them.
Right.
Because the reality is, if a kid knows you care about them,
Come on.
they are not likely to disappoint. Like they're going to do what you ask them to do.
That's good.
Take the time to get to know your kids, right? Put your arms. I don't know. Nowadays, you can't even put your arm around them. But
The point is very valid because people know whether you're authentic or not. Like I said, I think one of the biggest things that you had is when people can call you Lambo, there's a relationship there that they, like when you finally were saying, hey, you need to do this, people respected that more because they valued the relationship than it was. I never had a relationship, and I had this infinity at my churches. I always wanted to get to know the pastors very, very well because the pastor sets the tone for everything, even more than elderships. And you guys can disagree, but like not my experience. It's the pastor of what kind of runs everything, and then the elders work through the pastor. That's what it was. And I was very close to this pastor. Sean Moore was his name at Northside for many years. He's no longer even a pastor. He hung it all that we burnt him out completely. He doesn't even want to do it anymore. But, the things that I saw with that was it was never a real relationship. It was always this facade of something, and one of the things later in my life, I got to have a real relationship with him, and we've shared some very good stories of really benefiting that.
That's cool.
But it was after he was on his way out from the church, because in the church, it is full of what it looks like. Just make it look this way. It has to be what it looks like. And I think from watching you guys as this congregation, which we're sitting in recording, is it doesn't look like normal church. It just does. I mean, you have worship music and you do your communion and everything, but like just this last Sunday, we've talked about it, but we'll talk about it again, like having people come up in the pulpit that weren't you sharing. Most pastors would be like, that's your time to shine, baby. Like, honestly, put on the 2000. I mean, Stephen Furrick on Easter wore a $2,000 pink polka dot sweater or something. Yeah, for sure. $2,000. Yeah. And talks about it. Like, look at this sweater. I don't think that's what we need to be doing as a church. Sure. And that is that's church today. Instead of what you're saying is like, man, do we have the relationship that we can actually know these people? Going back to what was the kid's name that told you that? Tommy. Yeah. I think that's a very valid point. It's like, if I even knew who Tommy was, you would have approached that situation 100% different. Yeah.
Way Another question for both you guys, and this has to do with control versus freedom. And I got a funny story. It's weird, but it's funny. And I came.
Great setup.
This church, Lori and I have been lead pastors for about 15 years now, and we came from a church in Vancouver, and this was the mindset we had, and there's some air in it. I'm going to share the air. We had about 3 years after that, we had a couple come from that same church who's still here today. I won't tell you who they are. You can probably figure it out.
Let's see. I'm going to go through my names.
Sure.
But this, and it's not.
Is it you? Are you listening to this?
And it's not them. It was the culture that was in that church. And they started leading a group, just a regular house church group, whatever you want to call it, small group. And about 4 or 5 weeks into it, I was having lunch with the husband, and we're great friends. And he goes, "So, Van, at what time do we inform our group that we have spiritual authority over them?"
Okay.
It's the culture that they come from. Okay. And so I understood it. And this is the whole control versus freedom thing. I had to learn a long time ago that my job as a Christian, not a pastor, but a Christian, and as a pastor, my job is to point people to Jesus and have them build a relationship with him. I don't want your relationship to come through me and you come and ask me questions on everything in life and how do I brush my teeth today? Do I do this? Do I do that? My job as a Christian is to help you understand who Jesus is so you could walk with him, not to control your life. And I think religion versus relationship with God is a huge when it comes to control. I think many Christian organizations, many churches out there love to control people.
Yeah, well, I think, one of you made a comment about this earlier, and I can't remember who it was. Why is it so hard for us? Why can't we just have a relationship with people? And I think sometimes until we ourselves have walked through the fire,
Right.
it's hard to have that empathy for others.
Right.
I wish it weren't so. Oh. And so when we get that religious piece, right, that concept of, well, right and wrong, and I have authority, and, I had to walk that journey with Tommy to change completely how I view my students. Yeah. That had to happen, right? And I think when we experience that fire, that's when we can have that empathy, and that relationship can begin to eclipse the religion, and we can set aside the rules, right? And start looking at the heart and have that conversation with people.
Right. Because control is something that we shouldn't have over anybody.
Nope.
Yeah, I think it's really this wanting to be an authoritative place. Right. Is this concept of I'm holier than this person, or I'm more righteous than this person. And I think that's where the legalism really festers. Absolutely. Because then it's like, well, who can hold up the law the best? And I think you mentioned this earlier, Van, of, that's what Jesus really, like, his most fired up, heated lessons were at the Pharisees and the Sadducees, saying, man, you guys are just full of all these rules and regulations that none of you, the reason I'm here, the reason I had to come here and be in this form to you is because you suck. You didn't make it, And so,
be in control.
And so fast forward, the most obsessive country to a Bible, to these stories, we forget, we go back to this legalistic ranking system. I don't know if you accept this or not, but I'm going to say it. But it's like, if you're friends with the pastor of a church, you're in the upper echelon of the social group of that church. If you're in its small group, if you have a home group and those people they're more holy, he's got access to the pastor. Or if you're the elder, like, your elders never sin, right? They're perfect. They're the most best ever, You work at Whitworth. That's a prestigious Christians or Presbyterian school here. And man, you must never struggle. And that's how we all view it, instead of this office of humility. It's because we want to have that authority. We want to have this control. And when I think of this, is like, man, the apostles were healing dead people. That's how much authority they have. Are these people healing dead people? I mean, are they bringing them back? Because that is where I think humility in having a relationship. And I think that's what, Van, I appreciated about you as much as I do, is you have gone to some very crappy places to meet with people continually. You don't, it's not flashy. It isn't clean. It isn't this, look at me, come to my office. You go to these people in very shitty places in life and meet with them in their homes that smell like drugs, on the streets, you're barbecuing people. And one of the things that I love is you talk about Jesus and you have a relationship with people. And I think that's what you see in this congregation as well. And I'm not putting you on a pedestal. I just think that is what the heart of the relationship part of why, and you say this all the time, so listening to your letters, but that's why you hate religion. And I do too, because it blinds us to really who people are. And I'll end with this, like, who they could be in Christ, because if they come in and they see you as a Christian as a dick and judging them all the time, they never get to experience the transformation, because they're going to be like, you know what, I went to that church, I felt like shit even more, and I'm never going back. And that person could be, I mean, you don't have to say this, but I guarantee there are powerful leaders in your church and this organization that have very terrible pasts,
absolutely.
But they made it out, and now they're serving God in a way that when you first met them, they probably, if you wrote them off, like, oh, that person, you did drugs, never going to happen. You got pregnant in high school, you're pretty much end your life. And that's the culture I came from. As soon as you sinned in Church of Christ, donezo. Yep. Like, stop coming. You already punched your ticket to Lucifer's house. You're going to be in hell. I mean, that's how you felt. Whoever came for in the invitation, you were marked. Seriously. Back in 1991, Vince went front pew and said 3 sins. That's your permanent, your social credit card in Church of Christ. Yeah, exactly. I got a V on my head there. Boom. They said, you're marked.
Was there like a secret door that they pushed and you just
drop
through?
No, but I could never sit in the front 12 pews for some reason. I don't know. I know.
You just brought up something I think is really important, and Keith, speak to this as an educator. Are we actually concerned about people's potential? Because is that not what we're here for? Is to bring people that are broken and to see them get healed through Christ and the power of Christ and the love of Christ. But yet God has plans for everybody, I believe, whatever those plans are. And I believe our job as Christians is to help people see the potential that God sees in them, that he wants to see fulfill in them.
Every single student that I have, whether it's in college or it was when I was in the K-12 system, has potential.
Absolutely.
They all have potential. And I train my teachers. Think about that.
Yeah.
The kid that is pissing you off
has potential.
Has potential.
Yep.
And you've got to get to the heart of what's drawing that kid in.
Yeah.
You may never know their answer. You may never know what their end game is. But you have one opportunity with that kid for that year, for that semester, for that time to invest in them.
Yep.
And in many cases, you may be the only one that invests in them.
Yeah.
And they'll hold on to that forever, right? I mean, that I think is critical. And if we could, as Christians, start living that way on a regular basis, can you imagine? I mean, people would clamor to Christianity if that's what we put out there versus all these rules and regulations. I mean, when I was in Linden, you talk about that, who's with the pastor and who's not, right? Sadly, in Christian circles, it's the pastors who tend to actually have the affairs because they don't know who else to go to, right? Yeah. They don't know who do I talk to because they're up here. Right. We put them up on this pedestal. We had a group. It was myself, principal, my pastor, my associate pastor, the mayor, the state patrolman, and a businessman. And we played poker once a month.
Oh my God!
Straight to hell.
And we had
hey, if you don't go up in front on Sunday and confess, we got problems. It's out there. It's recording is happening. We got him. You just got kicked out of the church.
That was our safety group. That's where we could unload. That's where we could talk about the shit that was happening, whether it was in the politics, in the church, in every single one of us knew that was safe.
Yeah.
Right. But why do we have to go in a basement to do that?
Right.
I mean, that's the sad part. Yep. We shouldn't have to do that. We should be able to be above ground on a regular basis and be okay with the fact that I'm not okay.
Yep.
I think that's church, and when I look at the examples of the body of Christ, those of the way, when we first hear about it, that's what they were doing. They were interacting with each other on a life where it was a safe place. And kind of what you were saying earlier, at that time, people were coming to hundreds were coming to know Christ and being saved as a day because of what they were doing. Well, and if our job is to grow the church and if make disciples, if that's what we call ourselves as Christians, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Why have we made it such this complicated, well, you have to go through this checklist and rules and regulations instead of saying, hey, you know what? This is the mission statement, and it's to love people and meet them where they are, and then let them have the Holy Spirit through the Word of God transform their lives. I know one of the best compliments that I ever get in my life right now is, Vince, who you used to be. And it's hard because you never want to accept who you used to be. I think I still feel it's like, well, I'm sorry I was a dickhead for so long, but I found the light bulbs came on. But when they say, Van says this out of an encouragement to me, but we had a long period of time. We didn't purposefully not talk to each other. I didn't have a grudge against you.
Right, you moved away.
Right. It just, life didn't cross in front of each other. And so when we met up for the very first time, you've said this multiple times, you said within the first 5 minutes, I was like, this is not the same person that I used to interact with. And that is a compliment, but it just goes to the power of those relationships in basements. We met a lot of times in coffee shops and in his truck and just, vulnerable times. Why do we make it so hard? Why don't we do that in church where that's the place? It's like,
absolutely.
Like church is that. It's like you go to McDonald's and they're like not serving a Big Mac. You're like, what are you talking about? You're like, oh yeah, we don't have a Big Mac. You're like, you're known for this Big Mac. No, only vegetable burgers. You're like, what? I don't understand it. But I think this to your point too, and this is not at Van as well, but there is this status in church, and it does come from, all the time. Like you can go and I'm the senior global pastor. Van doesn't ever call himself this. I want people to know that he's a pastor, that you do have a church, because you speak to those experiences a lot. That's the only reason why I call you pastor. When I'm doing other things, it's just Van. But on this, it's like, I want you guys to know that this comes from a resume of education. You have this, just like you are a professor, like you have the education and resume. But the one thing that you don't is you shy away from there. Like, I get your point, but you're not, oh, hey, I'm Pastor Bill. I'm pastor. I mean, the people are like, I'm senior pastor Kurt, blah, blah, blah. It just drives me nuts, because why can't you just be Kurt? Right. Why can't you just be, this person and what it is? But we've created this whole, you must be one of the good Christians if you get invited to Van's house. Oh, you're on Van's podcast, and that's the thing that I think really we focus more on, instead of the 6 people that came in and sat on the back pew and they were like crying and hurting that we didn't get to because they just felt so judged that they walked back out and left to their car and said, well, I tried you, God, and you didn't show up. Right. And God's like, man, I created this church to help people. Right. Like one of the things that you said, Van, too, and I'll throw it back to you, but we don't need God to be revival in the church. We need people to do things. Right. And I think that starts with having a relationship with very broken people, and that starts with admitting that you're a very broken person yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our job as Christians is to help each other find Christ, walk with Christ, and point people to Christ. And that is, Keith, you guys went through some...
Sounds so simple, Van.
You guys went through some stuff the last few years, and you guys found some great friendships. You had some outside before you came here, but you had a couple here, and you were honest, say, hey, we need you guys right now. We need help. We need friendships. And every family goes through hard times, and they should be able to say that in the church. Yeah. We're struggling right now. We're going through a storm in life, and there should be 2, 3, 4 couples come around and just give you guys hugs and hold your hand for however long that is. That might be 6 months, it might be 2 years, or whatever it is. But that's our job, is to encourage and help and exhort and lift up. And sometimes people need that big time. The body of Christ, Paul talks about this, and I'll leave this, and Keith, you could take it, is that Paul says it's just like the human body. Okay, the thumb can't say to the eye, I don't need you. Yes, you do need the eyeball, because if you can't see, you're not going to go anywhere, thumb. We need each other desperately, but we need each other not to be religious or judgmental. We need each other to help each other.
Yeah, I've got 2 stories along that line. I'm going to hit on the church one that you talked about, and the shit that we went through as a family.
The poo-poo?
Yeah. To the point of, okay, what is religion versus relationship, right? This comes back to this. And I distinctly remember sitting in pools, Van and I having a conversation. He checking in with me on this whole thing going on. And it was a February. And I said, I got to tell you, we're not coming to church for a while. And I said, and there's 2 reasons. Because I'm either going to punch somebody in the face if they look at me and say, God's got a plan for this. Or I'm going to tell them to f off, and neither is going to go well at the church.
You have to sit up front if you did that.
Yeah, I would. And what I appreciated most...
Be right there next to Vince McGee in the dunce cap church. That's why I don't come anymore. Like, Vince, like, you won't do that. I was like, whatever. Why is there an alarm on my truck knowing when I pull in?
There's a school.
I saw it. I saw it. Oh, I see.
Van's response was going to determine how long I would be at this church. Van said, you shouldn't.
And then I bought you an extra Moscow meal.
And then did buy me an extra Moscow meal.
Ladies and gentlemen, please use that strategy. Cautionary.
Cautiously. But I think...
You want to come to my church? No. Can we get another round? You want to come back to church? No. Hey, can we get one? Double it.
Yeah. But I think that...
Can we talk about your tithing? Let's get him another round. Get him Lucy.
But that was relationship, right? If he had tried to talk me into, well, you got to be there on Sundays, because that's where, you're really going to be able to work through this. No, I'm not. I'm not going to be able to work through this right now. God and I were actually at odds. We were not on talking terms and
yelling terms.
We were on yelling terms. Yeah. I mean, there were times where we were, and I think that's ultimately for me was an example of what relationship looks like versus what religion looks like. The other one's not as sexy, but it is tied to what I do as for a living. And I can remember this young lady coming to my office, and she said, I'm going to transfer to Linden. And I never talk kids out of doing that. But I said, talk to me about why. Yeah. Well, my GPA is not as good as everybody else, and I just don't feel smart. All right. I said, what is it? What's a 3.0? My mom had just given me my report cards earlier that year. I don't know why, because she's cleaning out. That's what parents do. They kick you out of the house and clean everything out.
If you want it, it's yours. If not, it's going to the trash. Yeah.
Well, I will tell you, I graduated high school with a whopping 2.2.
Wow.
And so I don't know what it was in me, but it was just that idea of, okay, she's got to know she's not dumb.
Right.
I'm not dumb. Yeah. I just happened to go through a lot of crap in my life, and I figured out a 2.2 is exactly how you keep people off off your back, right?
Doing enough,
Yeah, I'm doing just enough. Well, bottom line, I showed her, and I said, don't ever let a letter or a number on a piece of paper tell you who you are.
That's good.
That's a lie.
Yeah.
Because if that's true, I should be shoveling dirt somewhere and not be a high school principal. Right. Religion does that to people. Yeah. Again, it's that number and letter on a piece of paper that will be determined by your Christianity level versus we got stuff to deal with. Yeah. And how do you listen to what's going on? I mean, that's key, right? Going back to that day at Pools, listening to what I was going through. Yeah. Versus already having an answer that was a good religion answer that would, he could feel good about. He mark it off. I had this conversation with Keith and gave him all the right scriptures and all the right reasons to be in church, and we'll be saving a pew for you. No. You shouldn't come for a while. You shouldn't, And I think those are the things we have to be willing to do. If we're going to have a relationship, it starts with listening. Yeah. What's going on in the heart of the person that's sitting right across from us?
Yeah. That's good.
A lot of times, one of the biggest changes that has happened, and especially in my faith walk, was, we talked about this right before we hopped on to record, is going through hard times yourself. Mm-hmm. When you really walk through really devastation times. And at my lowest moments, I was raised in a church that everybody said, I loved you, you're great, we'll always be there for you. And at my lowest times, my own family abandoned me. There was nobody there, no one to call. There was no call to check in for help. There's just nothing. And to this day, I know that wears on at least my parents, because when I say that to them, you can see this look like, man, we maybe played that one wrong. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that, but that's what I feel is true about it, because it's just very silent about it. Because if we're truly the body of Christ, and if we truly loved people, we wouldn't abandon them. We wouldn't, because when did that happen in the Bible? And that's where I think if we're really honest with ourselves, we're all broken. And I was so broken in that, and this is what sucks, and this is where I don't have the answer for this, is I look back at that now and am grateful, because it has led to so many more positive relationships that I've not only turned my life to what I believe is one of the greatest faith journeys you can have. And Van, you can vouch for that, and seeing, like, I wrestle with God all the time, but I have the right to, I've put myself in a position to ask the hard questions, like, what is this about, and doing the work. But with that, also, I've had humility to interact with people I never thought would reach out to me or talk to me or understand, and have seen God do things that, like, in other people's lives, that it's like, man, that's interesting. Conversations that are happening. This very podcast was trusting in faith to be like, hey, I'm gonna go have this conversation with Van, and I sat in I don't remember what coffee, Dutch Brothers, what is that coffee shop?
Thomas Hammer.
Yeah, Thomas Hammer. For sure. It was this conversation that I came there for a mission. I saw what he was trying to accomplish, and I was like, I think this is what there was no, Vince, this is God, do this. It wasn't that. It was more like, hey, you know, this could help other people because of my story, because of your stories, and that meets people where they are, you know, and I think that's what I love about Van, but I don't want to say that it should just be Van. It should be us as Christians saying, right, we should be saying, hey, you know what, my brokenness and my pain and agony, and the thing that I don't know, I'll get to that. I know I'm long-winded, but the thing is like, if you haven't gone through hard times, and I know there are people who haven't gone through really hard times, and a lot of them sit in churches, and you have usually the good seats in the pew, and you have a very good religious resume, right? How can you humble yourself to truly help broken people when you haven't experienced that yourself? Yeah. But that is what Christ was, right? So if you truly want to be the example of who Christians should be, which is the example of Jesus, Jesus was the only one who did it perfect. And he had such a heart for the most broken people. Yeah. How do you have that heart? Because it took me, and I don't recommend going the Vince McGee route. I don't, I guarantee you don't recommend like, hey, going through, like, I don't want to go, right. You don't want to go through this. So how do you get to a place where we can see people as Jesus sees them? And going back to what I said to my dad, I was like, do we look at people and say, God created this person, right. And I'm going to love them for even doing drugs right now because they're hurting, and I'm going to love them because they have a story, and I'm going to love them because, you know, even this time that I've been on the streets talking to people and trying to help them, it is always, they have terrible stories. I mean, their parents were not there for, I mean, there's all of these things, right? So when we just drive up to the road and we see that person doing drugs, I think they deserve it. They do, but we do it. It's like, oh, they could get a job. McDonald's is hiring. And I say this all the time, but it's like, the true story is, if that person's been on the streets more than 5 days, they probably don't know where to take a shower. They probably don't have clean clothes. They can go to a charity. Go look at the charities. Go get the story of these broken people that we judge all the time. And if you're a decent human being, and hopefully you are if you're calling you a Christian, if you expose yourself to learning people's stories, the relationship has already started. And that relationship then will convict you to do something in that relationship, and that person will notice that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most important things we could do as a Christian is, and I share this all the time, I teach this all the time, you need to get to know somebody. First, I hate, like we mentioned, the person on the street yelling. You don't know anything about anybody there, and you're not going to get anybody saved. So knock it off.
Well, this is what I was funny.
I want to watch my football game.
Yeah. Well, this was funny on Sunday. You said this, and you can finish your story. On Sunday, from the pulpit, you said this. What do you guys do? Did you not pray for anyone this Sunday or this week? And like, people came up and talked. I mean, it was a good response, but those were your exact words. You looked around and you said, "What? Did not anyone pray for anyone today?" I'm glad some people.
And then people came up, and
it was very better testimonies than expected, but it was awesome.
And it is, and I do have to admit this. I've said before, I'm going to change the way we do church, and I want to, because I want to hear from people. Yeah. I want to hear people's stories, and because everybody has a story. Yeah. And I want to say one more thing, and you talked about how valuable is somebody. Every soul is worth more than every bit of money on the face of the earth. There's not one soul that's more valuable than another. God created everybody equally, and every soul is worth more than all the money in the world. So that's why we're here, is to find more souls that want to serve Jesus.
Well, you guys, I think that's all the time we got for this one. Keith, thank you for coming on. This is going to be, I'm sure, multiple guest appearance for him. He has got all kinds of great stories. I don't even think we've tapped. This is a very specific topic, but just talking offline, I think it's going to be great to have kind of your experiences and insight that shares with people, because it's the real stories. You know, the one thing that we want to do with Live Love today is, this is not standard answers. This is in the thick of it. This is in the bloody, the guts, the realness of life. And if we're true with each other and you can hear these stories, they are here to encourage you, because we've gone through it. And it's not, and you've heard 3 different people. You have the mighty Pastor Van, who is very humble in what he's been through and the things that he's gone through. You have Keith, who has successfully done, I mean, he is teaching educators, which is very, I mean, we didn't even get to go into that, but like, you know, how many people are you teaching that they're going to go out and teach people and really shape a generation. And I'm telling you right now, we didn't get into this, and this is not the time, but like our education system, especially in Christian environments, is questionable at best, and I think you have a front seat into what's going on there. But these are real stories, and these are, these are not made up. So if you guys have any encouragement that we can give you, any questions, anything that you have, the contact is obviously in this description for all of us. Like I said earlier in the podcast, Van and Keith and their church that they're doing, they do know how to love people, and that they've seen a lot of great benefits that God has allowed to happen through loving people. So if you're worried about your congregation and how you can better love people, they would have that conversation with you guys as well. So thanks for tuning in. We're definitely just getting started on this podcast. Keith, thanks again for having us. Van, you know how we do it, man. We'll see them next week.
Yes, have a great week. And thank you, Keith.
Yeah, thank you, boys.
Sorry I didn't bring the bourbon.
Yeah, next time.
Okay.
Yeah, what happened there, dude?
I did cook meat.